Let's go here, but. Oh, yeah. Well, you're always making in-person attendance, and today we're gonna go, well, it's hard, it's gonna happen. Learn control, right? So, I mean, you can see other people starting to show up, so.
Yeah.
So there have to be some, you know. More people having one, so.
All right, everyone. We'll take just a minute to let people filter in. We know people are transitioning between meetings and getting logged in, but we'll get started in just a minute. All right, welcome everyone. So I'm Sarah Brewer. I'm the director of our education program at Accords. I want to welcome you all today, most of you on Zoom. So for those of you who are maybe not familiar or less familiar with us at Accords, I want to start off by sharing a little bit about who we are and what we do. So Accords is supported by the University of Colorado School of Medicine and Children's Hospital of Colorado, and it's a unique one-stop shop environment for faculty to conduct pragmatic research, to receive various types of services and supports for grants and projects, along with incredible mentorship, training, and education in health services research. So you can see some of the kinds of supports and structures we have to bring to your research projects. And I specifically want to highlight one of our methodological cores and programs today. We are partnered with our mHealth and Informatics core for this series. So especially thank you to Susan Moore for all of her support and planning and bringing her network to our speaker series. In addition, in our education program, which is part of our team's core, training, education, and mentorship, we've got a bunch of upcoming events. So mark your calendars. Next week, we have a special guest lecture coming to present on implementation science and precision health. If you are particularly interested in these topics, please shoot us an email and let us know. We have a couple of opportunities next Tuesday to meet with her in small groups. So we would love to include you in that. The following week, we have the next in this series, Emerging Topics in Digital Health and Clinical Informatics with Clint Carlson. In December, we are launching our series, Transforming and Advancing a Learning Health System for Multiple Perspectives for Mutual Gain, with a presentation from Edward Stenheim. And then another in this series. So we are having a lot this fall around digital health and clinical informatics, and we'll be hearing from Annie Collier on December 9th. In February, I'm super excited to share that we are launching a new workshop in partnership with CCTSI and CETA, the Center for Innovative Design and Analysis. And it's a pragmatic research planning workshop. And we are just finalizing the dates for that. I believe it's going to be February 14th and February 28th. And information to apply and join that workshop will be coming out hopefully this week. And then lastly, our annual conference is the Colorado Pragmatic Research and Health Conference that is set for June 4th and 5th. And we hope you'll save the date. Again, information to register for CopperCon is coming up soon. All right. Before I hand over the floor to our speaker today, just a couple of housekeeping items. First, if you are on Zoom today, please go ahead and use that chat. Drop your thoughts, comments, questions along the way. We will have time for Q&A at the end of the hour. And then second, keep an eye out for the evaluation link. We really value your input and feedback on our seminar series. And we hope you'll take a minute to tell us how we're doing and how we might better support you with our educational offerings. And if you are here in the room, we do have paper ones in the back. You're welcome to fill it out online too. Okay. Think that's all of our housekeeping. I am really excited today to introduce the next in our series, Emerging Topics in Digital Health and Clinical Informatics. It's the second in our series, and we'll be continuing through the spring. And today we welcome Kathy Bodine. Kathy is professor in the Department of Bioengineering. She's executive director of the Coleman Institute for Cognitive Disabilities and the director of both the Center for Inclusive Design and the Innovation Ecosystem with CCTSI. She focuses on assistive, medical, and accessible mainstream technologies, translational applications, and design innovations. Please join me in welcoming Kathy as she presents Inclusive Design for Digital Health and Applied Clinical Informatics. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi there, everyone in digital land. I see some names I recognize, so that makes me happy. Let's see. Where is our clicker? There we go. Okay. So Susan invited me to come today to talk to you guys about inclusive design. And so I'm excited to be here, and we'll talk a lot more about that in just a minute. But basically, just to give you a little hint of who I am, I'm somebody that has spent my entire career really focused on ICT as well as hardware and making sure that it works for everyone. That's really my goal in life, is to think about how do people living with or aging into disability access technologies, as well as how do everyday people access the technologies, because there's always a village involved. And so let's jump in. I'm going to give you a little bit of a hint about what we're going to talk about. My guess is, for those of you on Zoom and those of you in the room, there'll be bits and pieces of this you may know already, and hopefully there will be some new nuggets and some new information that you don't know, and we can bring this all together so we're kind of all at the same level when we're finished. So we're going to first talk about, throughout this talk, we're going to identify barriers to digital health adoption by patient populations. Why don't they use the stuff? It's there. It's wonderful, right? We're also going to understand, hopefully, by the time I'm done, we'll really understand the importance of inclusive design. This is a little bit of a different topic, and more on that coming shortly. And also, what are some strategies that we can actually adopt and implement that aren't that hard, that can really help reduce those barriers to adoption through our design process? So I'm going to talk a little bit just about a study. We launched our product testing lab probably 15 years ago or so. And so one of the things we did, and this is a bit old, as you'll see from the look and feel here, but it was such a great example. And I'm going to just share with you some of the things that we did in this particular study. So first of all, we compared Tumblr, Instagram, Pinterest, and Facebook social media apps. And in this case, we were looking to see how accessible were they for people with mild cognitive impairment. Think grandma still living at home. Think maybe someone who's 18 with a significant learning disability, those kind of folks, right? And so here's what's interesting. On these three particular screens, you can see basically almost 100% of the participants selected the wrong icon for at least one task in each of these apps. And so basically, if you look at this, if the icons that are available, and I'll kind of run this is transparent in terms of it's hard to see. These are over here, these are down here. It made it really challenging for folks just to find the basic icons. Another thing we noticed is that things don't always operate the way they're advertised. So for example, in Facebook, there's a little bitty bar line right between Edward and the drop-down menu. And about 40% of our users thought that both buttons were the same, and they didn't see the line between the two of them. Simple, 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 right? And then almost 70% of our participants made this little error on the right. It said friends. So what happens when you click friends? Anybody know? It doesn't go to your friends. It does not. No, it's trying to entice you to get more friends. And so that was really frustrating for our participants. And yet these apps are how popular? And they're out there. And how many people are not able to use them or frustrated every time they try and give up? Okay. So the other thing we found is like how operations flowed to complete a task. That's not always logical. So almost half of the participants, 47%, couldn't create a post in Tumblr. And then we found similar issues in Instagram and to a lesser degree, but still there for Facebook. So they wanted to post a picture. The task was post a picture on Facebook, post a picture on Tumblr. And the problem was that there was an extra step in there. So they'd get a pop-up when they click on the teddy bear to post it. And they had to tap the top right check mark if you don't want the larger picture in order to get it to go away before it could go on to be posted. Simple, but terribly confusing. Those are just some really basic, just kind of want to give you an idea of what we saw in usability testing. Now we're going to go on and figure out how we can discriminate and do these things a little bit differently. So we've all heard the term accessibility, user-centered design, inclusive design. You may have heard all of those. And to a lot of people, those all mean the same thing. And that's not true. So I want to correct that and maybe kind of get us all on the same page. Accessibility is really about designing a product or service so that it's usable by someone with a disability. If someone is blind, they might want to use a screen reader with the product. If someone is deaf, they may not want voice output. They may want a caption. If someone has an essential trimmer, they may need a larger target area so that they can actually tap a button and hit it correctly. And that's the big piece of accessibility, right? And we all know the standards. I'm sure most of us, if you're in the design field, I'm sure you've been made aware, and certainly in Colorado, since the new laws and regulations went into effect about accessibility, we're all jumping on the bandwagon now, which I am personally celebrating, but I know how hard it is. So something to think about. Okay, user-centered design is a design process. And that is a bit different, right? And it's really focused on the user's needs and goals throughout the design process. So it's an iterative process. You bring folks in, maybe with your Wizard of Oz design, maybe it's a pen and paper, maybe it's a very simple PowerPoint with the flow of how your product is going to go. And you get the data from the potential users who are interested in having this product, right? And then you analyze and analyze and analyze their feedback, and you shift your design so that you are hopefully creating a product that is going to be focused on that user. Okay. And it's really, the goal is really to get somebody to like it, to feel like their needs are being met and they're going to use it. But if you are 7 years old, is the kid the only one that's going to be using this app? No, it's a village. It's a village. And this is where we come to inclusive design. Okay, so inclusive design really encompasses all that human-centered design has to offer. And it's really at the middle of the Venn diagram, if you will. And the idea is to create products that are understandable and that enable people of all backgrounds and abilities to use them. And it may be accessibility, it may be age, it could be an economic situation, education, gender, all of these things that are on the PowerPoint. And basically, you're trying to fit as many user needs as possible, not just as many users. Does that make sense? It's a fine discrimination, but it's really important when we think about particularly digital health tech, because that is popping out all over the universe. And it's something we need to think about. And we're going to get into a little bit more in just a minute. But why would that be important? So the who cares kind of thing. Why is that important? Well, I'm going to give you some numbers. Those of you that like stats are going to love me for the next few slides. Those of you that don't, enjoy your sandwich. Okay. So right now, 2.5 billion people today would benefit from one or more assistive products. We have 8 billion people in the world, just to give you a framework. And by 2050, they are saying, and this is from the World Health Organization, over 3.5 billion people are going to need this. So when we talk about inclusive design and we talk about accessibility and user-centered design, we are talking about almost half of the world's population in a very short amount of time. So this isn't trivial. This is not trivial at all. Okay, why is that? And many of you know this already. We live in an aging world. Something besides COVID happened in 2020. Did you know that? It was kind of, I didn't realize it until 2021, but nonetheless, something did happen. In 2020, for the first time in our world's history, people over 60 outnumbered children under 5. And the numbers are literally straight up for older adults and straight down for kids. By 2050, India will be the youngest country in the world. That is really something to think about, right? It's really important to understand. And so, of these older adults, right now, today, at least 8% of people 65 and older live with a cognitive impairment. It may be a mild cognitive impairment. It may be from trauma. It can be from all kinds of things, but it's there. And basically, in 2022, there was a disability statistics annual report released. They don't have anything since then, but 8% of all US adults 65 and older have a cognitive impairment. And we spend $213.2 billion on direct medical costs on this population. And we spend almost $450 billion in direct social sector costs, including long-term care, and $651 billion in informal care cost. Makes what we're doing so important and what all of you that are here today are doing so important, okay? And right now, 5.2 million people worldwide live with dementia. The average cost is $24K US. That's going to be 153 million by 2050. And so the Alzheimer's Association says that it's really due to that increment of the lifespan. And so remember my 2020 surprise? Well, that's the outcome basically is, and what are we going to do? I mean, I think this is really something that to me is almost right there with climate change in terms of level of importance and degree of importance, because our world is changing very quickly. And I tell my students that, you know, they're going to graduate, 22 to 28 years old and go off in the world, and they're going to have a 70-some-odd-year-old in the cubicle next to them. So they better be ready to deal with that. And I think that's a very true statement for all of us. So let's take a look at the patients we serve here, basically UC Health and Shoots. Let's take a look at what's going on here in Colorado and around the world. Now, I'm going to start with get babies birth to 3, and there's a method to my madness that this I hope will make sense to you guys in a bit. The undercount of kids with disability, particularly birth to 3, is astounding. We did in Colorado get our number up to 5% recently in the last report to Congress, but right now they are counting at least over 3 million children in the disability in the US that have a disability. Okay. And then What's interesting, when there's a child welfare call, for those of you that look at other populations and community-based engagement, 35% of those investigations had children with delays or risk factors that made them eligible for early intervention services. And most of them, they weren't receiving them. Okay. Only 12.7% of those in need were receiving services. So more than half are not here. And that's just in Colorado, for the record, right? Basically the rates of service are completely inequitable across race, ethnicity, all of those things you might imagine. That also comes into play. And it begs the question, if we're going to be developing technologies to get into these homes and really get into these practices, how do we do it in such a way that they're actually going to adopt and use those, right? So school-age kids, 22-23 school year, 15% of school-age kids, public school only, are in special ed or related services, 15%. In Colorado, that's well over 130,000 kids a year are in formally identified and receiving special education services. And the most common diagnosis is specific learning disability. Do you think these people stop at 21 or 18 when they graduate? No, they go on to be our patients as adults, right? So something to think about. And that's pretty astounding. Now, in the 2019-2020 school year, kind of the pre-COVID-y thing, 21% of undergraduates and 11% of post-baccalaureate students reported having a disability. So it transitions to college and life. And in 2023, 7.4% of Coloradans 16 and older reported being unable to work because they had a disability. So you can see the GDP as I'm talking about these numbers fluctuating. It's fascinating. Medical care cost, all the things that we do are really important. Now, let's look at Colorado specifically for our older adults. Last time I checked, and that was a few months ago, we were 4th in the nation for the most people aging in our state. We are now at 928,000 people 65 and older in Colorado, and our population is not quite, is it 5 million, I believe now? Or 5.5 million, I believe, right in there. Yeah, and so it's the fastest and largest growing segment with a growth rate of 3.2% in Colorado. And that, by the way, the older adults in Colorado represent the fastest growing segment in our state. So that gives you an additional bite of information there. So 13.8% of our population are 65 and older, and it should be 20% by 2050. And of course, it's the older adults and the older old that are showing up as having this. Why does this matter with digital health technology? Well, because we're expecting people to use this stuff. I'm hearing buzzwords like hospital at home. Have you guys heard that yet? This notion of you don't come to the hospital, we take care of you at home. Okay, so 1 in 4 of our Coloradans live with a disability that they admit to today. And of course, functional impairment, disability, I almost wish we didn't use that word because people who are older don't admit to having disabilities. Now, Marge down the street, she's got a whole load of disabilities, right? But I don't have a disability. I do, however, have arthritis, and I can't use my hands to take lids off jars or open my medicine bottles, right? But that's not a disability. So this is what is admitted to. So, and it can be anything. It can be a mobility, and you guys know this, you don't need me to tell you. It can be cognition. It could be being safe at home, independent living, being able to cook your own meals, or being able to take a shower without falling. All of those things matter. And so when we design our products, these are the people that are going to be using them. So I think I've belabored that point quite a bit, but it's an important point. And so anybody in the room knows what happens, or on Zoom know what happens as we age? What happens to our bodies? Anything?
Just so you know, Zoom is putting in a couple of questions that we will, I think these out at Q&A.
If as we go helps, I'm happy to do it.
Is human-centered design synonymous with user-centered?
Human-centered and user-centered design, human-centered design is more the global word. I know it's all kind of silly at some level, but it infers that you've used user-centered design as a part of your process. And the human-centered design is really taking all of it into account.
Second question that I think is going to be really important context now is can an inclusive design approach be helpful to people with low health literacy and language barriers?
Yes. Yes, and we're going to talk about that. And that's why I love it so much, because it really does fit so many people. We're about to hop into that. Well, what happens as we age, to kind of go along with this, and why I'm pounding all of these points in, our vision changes, our hearing changes, our mobility changes, how our body operates changes through that. And each of you in your own specialty can tell me very significant and specific points to this. But the point is, we age. And guess what? As we age, health matters. It matters a lot. And so that's kind of why I think I was invited today to kind of talk a bit about digital health, and how do we really make products that are usable. And I think everyone on this call knows what digital health technologies are. But basically, it's just about anything having to do with our health that is electronic, right? So it could be something we wear, it could be something we use. I know I have an upcoming orthopedic appointment, and I was just this morning, going in early so I can be all registered up, and the thing got stuck. And I'm like through the 40,000th question, and it wouldn't go to the next slide or the next page. And I was just sitting at my desk at 7:30 this morning, completely frustrated because I could not get my EMR to move. And of course, it was one silly, stupid little box that I hadn't visually noticed as I was going through the page. Simple, frustrating, right? Okay, so all of this, so how do we really think about these things? We all know that they're good for us. We all know they're going to do wonderful things, but how do we make them work? And here are some other numbers to think about. I like numbers because I think numbers help give you context. The global digital health market is expected to be worth $1,190.4 billion by 2032. In 23, it was 264.1 billion. Where do you think medicine is going? And what do you think those expectations are, right? So we know that if we use this stuff, and I did not put this report, if anybody wants to go look at it, from Deloitte, Frost and Sullivan, has tons and tons of worldwide data. It's an amazing report on health technology. Key thing is the Internet of Medical Technology, as they call it. We know we can reduce readmissions by 50%. We can save over 300 billion in the US alone annually in remote patient monitoring of chronic management. 30% of American adults use wearable technologies, and about 85% of healthcare providers are now using this type of technology to support patient engagement and monitoring. And there's tons of other stuff in that particular report. We could have had a whole hour just on that report. It was pretty interesting. But here's the kicker. 1 in 5 patients are actually willing to report that they find health apps hard to use. And so if you can't see my cartoon, is it said he had to update his OS, download an app, get a username, choose a password, log into a health portal, navigate to messages, and write his doctor. By then it was too late. I think that encompasses some of the user experiences, pretty well. And I love that thing. I also want to point out there are already in 22 over 10 million health tech apps available around the world. 10 million. And we're just getting started because you saw how much this is going to explode, right? Okay. So what can we do that makes this better? Because people are frustrated. People do abandon technologies. People lose their lives because this technology isn't alerting them in a way they understand or need or can use. So how can we really help get to that point where we have this magic that needs to occur?
Beautifully timely question from the chat.
How
Often are companies expected to update their functionality or accessibility? And I've been told chat can't hear me, so if you can repeat that.
Okay,
Is
so
there a policy on how often
is there a policy on how often we have to
update functionality?
update the functionality or accessibility? No. But in Colorado now, we know we have regulations that went into effect that if your product isn't accessible, it's $3,500 for every infraction. So dependent on the size of your customer base, that is absolutely something to think about. Other states in the US are putting this in play. Now, I was just in Washington, DC last week at Enabling, and it was all AI, health tech, you know, the whole hours of it. And actually, it was wonderful. But one of the things that we're now doing is the European Union has an accessibility standard, just as we have IT accessibility standards, and they're now trying to harmonize those across Europe and North America. I will also tell you that we did a project that I can't tell you what we did, but it was for Canada. And basically it is setting it up in Canada so that if products aren't cognitively accessible, then no federal money can be used to purchase them. So not only am I talking about saving the world and kumbaya and doing the right thing, I'm also kind of, I hope, helping to alert you to some of the things that you really do have to take into consideration when you design and develop these products, because there are carrots and sticks on both sides. Not all of them pleasant. So does that help? All right. So I'm going to talk about the 8 principles of inclusive design, because these, and I love doing this with my engineering students because they cringe in their seats because they're just not, you know, that's just not how they roll. They much rather look at equations. But it makes a difference in technology design of all types. And so I want to talk about that. And the first thing we're going to talk about in these 8 principles are discovering your own biases. And I'll pick on myself because why not? I am a white female with a college degree that I make enough money to live on and have some left over, and I'm pretty privileged, you know, if you think about it. Now, I can argue some other points and we can get into that at happy hour. But the other point of this is that I have a neighbor who happens to be Black, who is college educated. She has a decent job, but she comes and talks to me quite often about that she's supposed to take some products from their company out into the field, primarily to use with African Americans, and the language used in them is so bad that it's offensive to them as a culture and as a group. And then, you know, and the other thing too is inclusive design does include disability, certainly. And guess what? Disability doesn't have any economic or gender or ethnic differences. It goes across all of these cultures. And so that makes it important. But if you don't know your own biases and you're sitting in a room, let's say it's an engineering team, and you have 5 really awesome engineers. I mean, good people doing a great job building a product. But guess what? Everyone in the room is college educated. Everyone is talking tech talk. And you don't have grandma in the room to tell you what's going to work or not work for her, right? So you have to understand what your own biases are, and that it takes a village in order to do this well. So next thing you need to think about is uncovering the user needs and pain points. And we call this customer discovery sometimes. We call it user experience. We call it lots of things. But the pain points are done so that you can really get in with your customer and understand their needs and their pain points and behaviors and the problems you're trying to solve for them. And I will give you an example too. We did a user test on a pill reminder, medication reminder system. And what we did is we not only tested it with older adults who might be using it, but we brought all their kids in too. They came in as family dyads. And we put the kids in the other room and said, here are the instructions, set this up for your mom or dad. the font in that thing was 4 points. And all the kids are 50 plus. So their eyes are starting to go if they haven't gone already, right? And not a single kid could set up the medication reminder for their parent. So the technical documentation is also user need and user pain points. And your user may not be that direct customer you think you're trying to sell to, right? So you have to think about all of that. And then you want to go back in and iteratively test that to see if you're getting it right. So that's where we include the user-centered design. That's that piece within inclusive design. So you see that there, and also accessibility. So I'm going to give you an example of a study. This has a health tech app thing that goes into it, but if I told you about it right now, I'd have to kill you. But nonetheless, we know that 35 to 50% of older adults abandon their walker on day one. Absolutely, positively refuse to use it. So we thought, wouldn't it be a good idea to find out why? So we did, and then just again, more numbers before I get into that. There are 2.7 million fall-related ED visits, and 1.1 of them end up in inpatient settings. And it's basically $22.9 billion a year just for ED visits and falls and admissions. So, okay. So we did, and I know this is a little bit hard to see, and I apologize for that. But basically, we surveyed nationally in the US over 3,300 people, and we had people who either were using or had used a walker in the last 6 months, as well as care providers, family members, and clinicians. And it was, honestly, it was mostly mobility users that we ended up with. And we wanted to know why. Well, 46% don't think they need it, first of all, because they're not old. Secondly, 31% said it would make them feel old. 21% said there's social stigma and it makes them vulnerable. They are scared to go outside with a walker because somebody's going to steal their purse or their wallet. So when we took all of this into account, my conclusion, I can sum this whole study up in: third grade never dies. We always worry about how we look. We always worry about how we're perceived. And no one who's ever designed a walker had thought about that in that way so far, right? So enter the Sexy Walker Project. We are building the iPhone of walkers. We are creating something, and this is not the final product, by the way. And yes, I know it would trip someone. This was our early conceptual designs, but I can show you this. We are working with Pininfarina. They are the Ferrari car design firm, and also an industry partner called Thought Forward Design. And we are working with users included on the team. And we're going to talk more about that. We are redesigning a walker so that it is so flippin' cool that everyone is jealous that you have one and they don't, because we want to improve health outcomes. Do you see how that works? You would think having a good looking walker would have nothing to do with health outcomes. Totally has everything to do with health outcomes. So another principle 3, be transparent and descriptive. When you design an interface, it needs to be so clean and clear that everybody can learn to use it and it's intuitive. You know, if you are 78 years old and you have never used an app for anything, much less healthcare, maybe you're doing some FaceTime. My favorite 92-year-old grandma FaceTime was that the screen was always looking at the ceiling every time we FaceTime because we couldn't get her to turn it up. Okay, so you want to really think about best practices so that users can learn how to use your product. And almost all of these products require some sort of onboarding or setup, right? And that may or may not be somebody there to do it for your patient. So you want to think about that, and you want those people to be engaged with you while you're designing this. And you don't want just people that look like you helping you. You want all the people that don't look like you helping you, right? And then you really do want to apply a holistic approach is really, kind of the key principle for me, which means that you're really looking at all the stakeholders. And, when we do our customer discovery in the I-Core training that Susan and I do together, we always ask our teams, who's your customer? And they always say, oh, it's this patient with cancer, or this patient with this or that or the other thing. And we say, are you sure? Maybe that's who you want to help, but who's going to pay for this? Who's going to set it up? Who's going to use it in order to help the health of your patient? And those things really have to be incorporated. And so all the stakeholders need to be considered in your customer discovery process and throughout your design process so that you can really have a winner. You know, everybody wants to get rich, right? Let's do it. But more importantly, we want to help people. You want to research the environment. Where is your product going to be used? We were talking, we've talked with teams who are using their product on an ambulance. We've talked with teams who are using their product in an OR. We've talked with teams who are using it in someone's home. Where are the environments that this is going to be used? And it may be coming from a busy doctor's office. How are they going to incorporate this? Have you talked to them? Do you understand what their needs and pain points are and how to include them throughout this process so that they're there and you're getting them a product they want and will use, right? And you want to use participative practices. You want these folks engaged. You don't want them just checking a box that, yeah, you got it. Because everybody wants to please. And that's one of the most important things. People like to please you because that's who we are as humans. So we want to make sure they're engaged in a way that allows them to feel like it's okay to say, have you thought about changing this? This would work better for me if it did that. You know, those kinds of things. Of course, we want to be sustainable in all of our practices. And really, it's all about making that ecosystem. Who is the ecosystem this product involves? And it may be the supply chain. It may be, you know, depending on which Qualcomm chip you want to use, whether you can get it or not. Who knows? You know, but it can be all of those things. And you really need to go beyond digital. We get so caught up, all of us, and I'm as guilty as anyone, in designing and building our products that we forget that that product will be living in a non-digital space. And so that is super important to consider, okay? So we also want to really anticipate our product's impact. You know, I always say, like with assistive devices, like screen reading systems on computers, what's the impact? Well, the impact is that for someone who is blind, it gives them access to a computer, assuming that everything they're using on the computer is accessible to that. But what are the shortcomings? Well, if you have to sit and listen to something in your ear for 8 hours, that might be a shortcoming, right? What is the intention of a screen reader? It's for people who are blind to have access to the computer. Well, guess what? It also works for people with literacy disorders who are unable to learn to read. That was not the intention of screen readers when they were first designed. That was the one-off usage of it. Now that they know that, they're doing a lot more to make it encompass that particular population, but they totally forgot that because they didn't do inclusive design, right? What are the shortcomings your product can have? I guarantee you, your product will not save the world. It will hopefully do one heck of a great job with whatever portion of the world you're interested in, right? But we have to know what our scope is and where do we fall in that continuum of all of these products. There is no single solution. Okay. And then one of the most important things you can do really is hire for diversity. You want your team to be diverse and you want to get all the different representations that you possibly can in your design. Again, it doesn't help if everybody looks like us. Now, is this a DEI pitch? No, not really. It's not. It's about thinking about how you can make the most money possible. We already know that when women are in C-suites, companies tend to make 35% higher profits than when women are not in C-suite jobs, as an example. Okay, so who's on your team? How are they going to give you that 35% bump? Because they come from a different worldview and they may be able to help. And I'll give you a really good example. Katie Nearing and her team have a project here on campus, and it's called Older Adult Research Specialists, where they've been training older adults as research specialists. I hired the best ever, or we call them ORs. I have the best ORs you can imagine on our team, and she is part of our research team. She's helping us with recruitment because people that look like her are more likely to participate in our work, as well as the fact that she brings a totally different perspective to everything we do. Highly recommend you think about that. Who's on your team? What's missing? Think about what's missing from your team. Who do you envision using your product? And how can you get access? Now, you maybe can't hire them financially, but how can you get that perspective if you don't have the wherewithal to hire 5 people or something like that? Who can you pick on to get engaged with your work and what you're doing? And then get out of your bubble. If you only talk to the people in your group, your product's going to be meh. You know, it may have a really cool algorithm, no doubt. But is it going to be usable? Because we start to cater based on everyone that's around us. It's the same thing with diet and exercise. If you hang out with people who exercise, you're more likely to exercise, right? If you don't hang out with people who don't exercise, if you hang out with people who don't exercise, you're probably not going to exercise. The same is true in design. Inclusive design means really getting out of that safe space and finding out how the rest of the world lives and how they might react to your ideas and how they can help you make it better. That's such a good way. And you can have design critique meetings. As an example, a strategy for this, have a design critique meeting, invite your mom, invite other people that are outside of your bubble so that you can get really super good feedback. If you're concerned that you might react to someone's feedback in the moment, have someone else facilitate that meeting so you can listen and record it so that you can talk about it later and you can listen again and really look to see, are we meeting these needs in the way we thought we were? Or is there something else that we need to do so that you can get going? We have this tendency, we want to get things through the pipeline, and this pipeline is brutal. No doubt, this pipeline is brutal when you work in a large medical environment. But you still need to have something that when you get through the pipeline, people actually want to use it, right? So that's super important. And then finally, you have to be intentional. You really have to know that when you make a design decision, there's a reason for that design decision. It isn't, Susan, what a great idea. I'm going to do that. No, that's not how you make decisions. You get that feedback you need, and you can't solve every problem. We keep what we call the classic parking lot. We've all done this, right? We keep version 1, has to be in scope. What is our scope for version 1? If we're going to make a change, it had better be intentional, or maybe we need to park that for the next iteration because we can inadvertently get into design creep and all kinds of crazy things. Okay. Now, I'm going to take you through. So those are the 8 steps or principles of inclusive design. So I hope you see how they fit with accessibility as well as user-centered design too, because it really does all play to that. And then, so I want to get back to you when we did this study. Well, we came up, the reason they put these products on the market with these boo-boos, if you will, is because they really didn't test it with the right groups. That's pretty obvious. And they didn't have the right team. So, okay, if visual cues and guidelines are often unclear or unrecognizable, either put some text on it or give a direct cue so that people know what to do. Right? And that encompasses lots of people. And then the clickable elements, if they're too close together, can make it really hard for people. So either have appropriate spacing or clear visual boundaries. Make it simple, right? And then finally, the issue of the flow of operations. A, reduce the number of steps to achieve critical actions. And B, although not on this slide, would be that notion of letting people know where they are when they get there, or as they're going, right? Simple things that can really make a complete difference in having over half the people using your product unable to use it. And these are social media apps. This isn't a health app. A health app can be getting it right matters. It matters a lot. And what you guys are doing is so important that you really do want to take these things into consideration. All right. So that is my chat for today. And if there are any other questions or comments, I'd love to hear from anyone in the audience.
Let's go.
Oh, thank you.
Questions for the chat? I'm gonna raise one that I'm gonna figure out how to raise one so you can hear it and the people on Zoom can hear it too. So I'm gonna come up here.
Okay.
I get this question a lot, and it's how to find funding or support to do this kind of design with early prototypes prior to doing the research projects that involve the technology.
Mhm.
And I get lots of investigators have this question. I'd be interested in your thoughts on it.
That's a tough question. We have done a number of things for money, as haven't we all? If you have a startup company, or if there's a spinoff within any of your systems, UC Health or Anschutz or whatever, that you can utilize Small Business Innovation Research Grants at phase 1. I love the STTR program because it's like the SBIR, except 50% of the funding has to be with a university partner. And that is another way that you can do this. We build in, when we write a federal grant, as an example, we build these components in. We also, depending on who we're applying to, we might go a little light in our description, or we might go really in depth depending on which federal agency we are applying for. So that's kind of the, if you work at a university response. The second, if you don't work at a university, I think that has to be keyed into your business model and your financial model. You have to put it in because the payoff is incredible. The return on investment is astounding. Yeah.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm gonna just join you up here for a second too. I'm
Okay.
gonna try and summarize. We've got a couple of comments in the chat that we're sort of poking at this idea of, sometimes the input you get is not all in the same direction and might have different principles for inclusion. So for example, one of our folks pointed out that your Lamborghini walker prototypes looked really heavy and you have to be able to take your walker with you, right? And somebody else pointed out some of the issues of like, we need security and, that's why we have logins and passwords.
Yeah.
But often that makes it much more complicated, right? Now we
Sure.
have to have a password and we have to have a different password for everything. And we then have to authenticate. And that actually can often result in people getting locked out
That's right.
while we're
Not
trying to
everybody
also a
has
simple
has
system.
a cell phone.
So how do you balance when you get the feedback that there are sort of different principles that would both lead to better inclusion, but might be in direct conflict with each other? How do you try to balance and get around that?
That's a great question, and it's a never-ending concern, and I don't want to make light of it because we struggle with it exactly like you do. I think there's a number of things that we have to be real about, and that is, a good point on the walker. We are not using that design for the record for all of the above named reasons, but you have to anticipate your product's impact. Number one, that's the first thing. And then going to the be intentional. There are some things like safety, privacy, security that are hurdles that we have to think about in terms of talking to our users, our potential users, and their support team, and figuring out where is this going to break down. And we have to know where it's going to break down. And we have to live with it sometimes. If it's a medical record, it's a medical record, And we have situations where we had one recent client who informed us that she did not want her daughter to know anything about her appointments, and this poor lady really needed somebody to help her, right? But that wasn't what she was going to go. So you're going to have those issues. There are times when there are conflicts. And so then you have to really, this sentence, focus on solutions that meet most needs, even though not all of them, but own it. I think we should be a lot, it's like we talk about, we don't publish bad papers, and that's become a science in and of itself. If you get bad results, you don't publish it. Well, likewise, we should not be promising people things that are not true. And so if there are these barriers, then be intentional about it. Make sure you know it and make sure that you are owning it so that you can at least give people the heads up they need in order to do it. It's hard.
I mentioned I do. So our folks on Zoom can hear.
Yeah.
So Kathy, I'm curious, I mentioned earlier that I do a lot of work with refugee communities, and one of those questions was about language as well.
Yes.
And I'm curious if you can talk about some of the other ways that we can be inclusive in our design. So you talked a lot about things that are sort of more physical disabilities or
Right.
cognitive disabilities.
I have a good one.
But what are some of the ways we can think about other ways for
Yes.
inclusion and accessibility?
That's a great question. Thank you for bringing that back around. So first of all, and I'm blanking on the name. I want to say Otter dot something. It's not Otter AI, but there's another one. But you can have real-time translation now in almost any language out there. And that is pretty phenomenal. There is work going on right now, and it is a group. It's Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Meta, and somebody else. There's 5. And I am peripherally involved with this right now. They are going out with patient populations and they're recording 400 voice samples from a wide range of populations. So let's say someone has had a stroke and they have some dysarthria. So we will be able now to translate using AI dysarthric speech so that the AI system can understand it. So we're working on these solutions right now. Because it may very well be if you're someone who can use voice, that might be a workaround not only for security issues, but also for various languages. And just speaking a different language than English, there's also how you speak that language. If you have mild cerebral palsy, for example, if you have deaf speech, those kinds of things. And so that's happening literally right now. And it'll be out, a couple months. It'll be happening really fast. So those are bringing in some really invaluable tools. But from our perspective, we have to make sure our safety and security is there as well. And they're promising me that they won't use this data. We'll see. We need to lock it up on our end. That's all I'm saying.
Last questions in the room. Going once, going twice.
Thanks in the chat, appreciating this talk.
Oh, thank you so
Exactly.
much. I hope it's helpful.
Yes, I was going to say there are a number of comments thanking you for a really wonderful talk. And
Thanks.
I'd like to thank you for coming and joining us in person and getting what was a really helpful talk. I can take a lot of these principles back to my own work. So,
Good.
thank you.
All right.
all right. And thank you to everyone who's online on Zoom, and that evaluation link is in the chat, and we'll drop it in one more time. And for those of you in the room, those are on that back table. Thank you so much, Kathy.
Thank you. All right. Bye, guys.